The rain poured down in heavy sheets, turning the city streets into shimmering rivers of light. A janitor, dressed in a faded blue uniform, hurried across the marble floors of a prestigious private school, pushing his mop with quiet efficiency. His name was Mr. Alvarez. To most students, he was invisible, a ghost who appeared only to clean up their messes. But to Ryan, he was something else entirely. Ryan was the kind of rich kid who made sure everyone knew it. With designer sneakers, a custom-made backpack and the latest phone in hand, he walked through the hallways like he owned them. He was untouchable. His father was a powerful businessman, and his mother was on the board of the school. To Ryan, people like Mr. Alvarez weren't just beneath him. They barely existed. One rainy afternoon, after a heated argument with his father about something as trivial as getting the wrong car for his birthday, Ryan stormed into the school lounge, kicking over a mop bucket just as Mr. Alvarez was cleaning the floor. Dirty water splashed everywhere. "Oops," Ryan smirked. "Better clean that up, old man." Mr. Alvarez sighed. He had been working double shifts to support his family after his wife fell ill, but he didn't let frustration show. He calmly knelt down and started wiping the water. But Ryan wasn't done. "Tell me something. Do you ever get tired of this?" Ryan asked, leaning against the lockers. "Mopping floors for kids who will probably make more money in a month than you'll make in your lifetime?" A couple of students chuckled, watching from a distance. Ryan thrived on an audience. Mr. Alvarez looked up at him, his expression unreadable. Then he smiled, not the kind of smile Ryan expected. It wasn't embarrassing. It wasn't angry. It was something else entirely. "You know," Mr. Alvarez said, "life has a funny way of surprising people." Ryan scoffed. "Yeah, sure, I'll be waiting for that big surprise." He didn't know that a year later, he would be the one mopping floors. The months passed, and Ryan barely thought about Mr. Alvarez after that day. He had more important things to focus on, like throwing the biggest birthday party of the year, showing off his latest luxury watch, and making sure everyone knew who ruled the school. But life has a way of humbling even the most untouchable. It started with whispers in the hallways. Ryan's father was under investigation, something about fraud, unpaid debts, and bad business deals. Ryan ignored the rumors. His father was too powerful to fall. Then came the headlines. Business tycoon Richard Sterling declares bankruptcy amid fraud allegations. Ryan's world collapsed overnight. The fancy cars, the designer clothes, the mansion. It was all gone. The accounts were frozen, assets seized. His father was facing lawsuits from former investors, and his mother disappeared from the social scene. The worst part? Ryan's private school tuition wasn't paid. One morning, he walked into class like any other day, but this time the principal was waiting. "Ryan, I need to see you in my office." He was informed that without payment, he could no longer attend. His parents were unreachable. His father was drowning in legal troubles, and his mother had moved in with relatives. Ryan was officially broke. For the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known before: helplessness. By the end of the week, Ryan was forced to leave. He packed his things, but there was nowhere to go except a tiny apartment his aunt owned on the other side of town. It wasn't long before reality hit even harder. He needed money. No trust fund, no allowance, no backup plan. Desperate, he walked into a local building looking for a job, any job. He couldn't afford to be picky, and that's when life delivered its punchline. The manager glanced at his resume, blank of course, and sighed. "You don't have experience, but we need cleaners. You'll be mopping floors, scrubbing toilets, basic maintenance. Pay is minimum wage." Ryan's heart sank, but he nodded. "I'll take it." The next day he was handed a mop, a bucket, and a uniform. He was now a janitor. He thought the humiliation couldn't get worse, but then he saw the supervisor walking towards him. It was Mr. Alvarez. Ryan's stomach twisted. He hadn't seen the man since he mocked him at school. Mr. Alvarez raised an eyebrow, clearly recognizing him, but said nothing. Instead, he handed Ryan a checklist. "Your shift starts at 7 a.m. sharp. Follow the list. Do your job right, and we won't have any problems. No malice, no revenge, just professionalism. Ryan nodded, unable to meet his eyes. He had once laughed at this man for doing exactly what he was about to do. And now? Now it was his turn to mop the floors. Ryan's first day on the job was worse than he imagined. The smell of cleaning chemicals stung his nose. His arms ached from scrubbing bathroom floors. His back hurt from bending over to pick up trash people had carelessly thrown on the ground. At school, he used to drop wrappers on the floor without a second thought. Now, he was the one picking them up. By lunch break, he was exhausted. He slumped onto a plastic chair in the janitor's lounge, staring at his blistered hands. Mr. Alvarez walked in and placed a bottle of water on the table. Drink. Ryan hesitated before reaching for it. Thanks, he muttered. Mr. Alvarez sat across from him, arms crossed. Rough first day? Ryan let out a dry laugh. You could say that. There was no sarcasm in Mr. Alvarez's voice, just something Ryan didn't expect, understanding. I was about your age when I got my first job as a janitor, Mr. Alvarez said. It wasn't easy, but life teaches you things when you're forced to start from the bottom. Ryan frowned. Like what? Mr. Alvarez leaned back. Like how people treat you when they think you're beneath them. The words stung. Ryan knew exactly what he meant. That evening, Ryan dragged himself home, barely able to keep his eyes open. He collapsed onto the thin mattress in his aunt's apartment and stared at the ceiling. His friends from his old life had stopped answering his messages. No more fancy parties, no more VIP treatment. He was alone. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be invisible. The next few weeks were brutal. Ryan woke up before sunrise every day, dragging himself to work while the rest of the city was still asleep. His once soft hands became rough from scrubbing floors. His feet ached from standing for hours. His clothes, once designer, were now stained with sweat and cleaning chemicals. The worst part? The way people looked at him, or rather the way they didn't. Customers walked past him as if he didn't exist. Some threw trash on the floor right after he cleaned it. Others laughed when they saw him struggle with heavy buckets of water. It was like he had become a background character in his own life. One afternoon, as he was wiping down tables, a group of teenagers walked in. Students from his old school. His heart stopped. They hadn't noticed him yet, but he recognized them immediately. They were the same people who used to fight for a spot at his table during lunch, the same ones who laughed at his jokes, followed his lead, and admired his wealth. Now they were laughing at something else, him. One of them pointed. "Dude, is that Ryan?" Another one snickered. "No way. What's he doing here?" Ryan felt his face burn with shame. He wanted to disappear. One of them walked up to him, smirking. "Hey man, didn't expect to see you here." His eyes flicked to Ryan's uniform. "Tough break, huh?" Ryan gritted his teeth. He wanted to fire back with some clever insult, but there was nothing left to say. His old world and his new world had just collided, and there was no escaping it. Before he could respond, a familiar voice spoke up. "If you're not ordering anything, leave." Mr. Alvarez stood behind Ryan, his expression calm but firm. The students exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. "Relax, old man, we're just saying hi." Mr. Alvarez didn't flinch. Saying hi doesn't require mocking someone who's working hard. The laughter faded. The group shuffled uncomfortably. Ryan's chest tightened. A few months ago, he would have been on their side. He would have been the one laughing. Now, he was the one being laughed at. The group mumbled something and left. Ryan stood there, gripping the rag in his hand so tightly, his knuckles turned white. Mr. Alvarez patted his shoulder. "Don't let them get to you." Ryan swallowed hard. "Why are you being nice to me?" Mr. Alvarez raised an eyebrow. "Because I know what it's like to fall." Ryan stared at him, but Mr. Alvarez didn't say anything else. He simply walked away, leaving Ryan to process the weight of his words. That night, as Ryan lay in bed, he realized something. For the first time in his life, he understood what respect really meant. It wasn't about money, it wasn't about power, it was about how you treated people, especially when you had nothing. To be continued. A month passed, and Ryan was starting to change, little by little. It wasn't immediate and it wasn't perfect, but he was beginning to understand things differently. The late nights spent cleaning offices, the endless hours of mopping, and the back-breaking labor were starting to feel less like punishment and more like lessons. He still hated the job, but he didn't mind it as much. There were small moments of clarity, like when he helped an elderly woman carry her bags to her car after she spilled some coffee on the floor. She smiled at him and thanked him, genuinely grateful. It wasn't much, but it felt good. Then there was the moment he realized that he no longer felt the urge to check his phone every 5 minutes to see if his old friends had messaged him. He knew they hadn't, but somehow that didn't bother him anymore. Mr. Alvarez noticed the change too. One day, after finishing their shift, Mr. Alvarez handed Ryan a small toolkit. "Here," he said, "you've been doing good work. I think you're ready for something a little more challenging." Ryan raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "You'll see. Start by fixing the leak in the kitchen tomorrow. I'll be around to guide you." Ryan took the kit, his heart racing. The idea of doing something more than cleaning, fixing something, making it better, felt empowering. The next day, Ryan spent hours repairing a leaky sink. At first, it felt overwhelming. He wasn't sure what he was doing, and he made a few mistakes. But Mr. Alvarez was patient, guiding him through each step without criticism. When Ryan finally managed to fix the leak, he couldn't contain his pride. It wasn't just the sink he had fixed, it was a piece of himself. From that point forward, Mr. Alvarez gave him more responsibilities. Ryan wasn't just a janitor anymore, he was learning a trade. But just as things seemed to be looking up, life threw another curveball. One evening, as Ryan was finishing his shift, he overheard a conversation in the break room. Mr. Alvarez was talking to the manager about an upcoming promotion. "You've been doing a great job, Alvarez," the manager said. "We're thinking of moving you to a supervisory position." Ryan froze, not sure whether to feel happy for Mr. Alvarez or jealous, but Mr. Alvarez simply shook his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I've got my reasons for staying where I am." The manager was puzzled. "You've been here for years. Why not move up?" Mr. Alvarez smiled. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Ryan stood in the doorway, caught between admiration and confusion. Mr. Alvarez had worked hard all his life, and yet he didn't want to move up the ladder. Why? The answer came to him later that night while he was lying in bed. Mr. Alvarez wasn't just a janitor. He had mastered the art of contentment. He had found peace in what he did, no matter how small or humble the job seemed. It wasn't about status or money. It was about doing something well and finding pride in it. Ryan had spent his whole life chasing after things, titles, wealth, recognition. He had thought that those things defined his worth. But now he saw the truth. Real fulfillment didn't come from what you had, but from what you did with what you had. That realization changed everything. Ryan no longer resented his job. He no longer saw it as a punishment. Instead, he approached it with a new sense of purpose, something he hadn't had in years. And slowly, he began to notice something else. As he started doing his work with pride, the people around him began to notice too. His fellow employees started respecting him, not because of his wealth or status, but because of his work ethic and integrity. One evening, as Ryan was mopping the floors, the manager walked up to him. "Ryan," he said, "we've been watching your progress. You've got something special. We're offering you a position as a supervisor. What do you think?" Ryan stood still for a moment, letting the words sink in. He could feel Mr. Alvarez's presence in the background, watching him, waiting. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Ryan nodded slowly, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. "I'll take it." Ryan's new role as supervisor wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a corner office or fancy perks. It was, however, a chance to prove something to himself, something deeper than just rising up in the workplace. The first few days were challenging. As a supervisor, Ryan now had to balance the responsibilities of overseeing others while continuing his own work. He was still cleaning, but now he was also organizing schedules, ensuring the team followed the company's rules, and dealing with any issues that arose. It was more pressure than he had expected. But Ryan took it in stride. He didn't allow the stress to overwhelm him. Instead, he focused on learning how to be the kind of leader people respected, not because of his title, but because of his actions. One afternoon, during a routine shift, one of the new hires, a young man named Aaron, had a breakdown. He was behind on his tasks and couldn't handle the stress. Ryan saw him sitting in a corner, head in his hands. "Hey, you all right?" Ryan asked, kneeling down next to him. Aaron looked up, his eyes filled with frustration and exhaustion. "I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this job." Ryan sat next to him, just listening for a moment. The old Ryan would have told him to suck it up, that everyone has to pull their weight. But now he understood. He understood what it felt like to struggle, to feel like you're not enough. "I get it," Ryan said quietly. "When I first started, I hated it. I thought I was too good for this job. But the thing is, you have to look at it differently. It's not about the job itself. It's about how you approach it. If you give it your best, no matter what, you'll feel good about yourself at the end of the day." Aaron looked at him, unsure. "But I'm just cleaning. It's not like it's important." Ryan shook his head. "Every job matters. Every task you do matters. You may not see the bigger picture right now, but believe me, it's there. If you make sure this place is clean, if you help people do their job in a better space, then you're making a difference." Aaron didn't say anything for a long moment. Finally, he nodded, wiping his eyes. "I'll try." Ryan smiled. "That's all you can do." That evening, as Ryan went home, he couldn't shake the feeling of pride that had begun to grow in him. He wasn't just leading by title, he was leading by example. He was showing people that no matter where you start, it's how you finish that counts. Weeks passed, and Ryan's newfound sense of purpose only deepened. His confidence grew as he saw the changes in his team. His employees respected him, not because of his authority, but because he respected them. He learned how to motivate, how to encourage, and most importantly, how to listen. One evening, as Ryan was closing up the store, Mr. Alvarez stopped by. The two exchanged a few words before Mr. Alvarez looked at him with a proud expression. "You've come a long way, Ryan." Ryan nodded, grateful for the man's wisdom. "I owe a lot of it to you." Mr. Alvarez shook his head. "You didn't need me. You just needed to realize what you were capable of." Ryan smiled, knowing it was true, but life had a funny way of throwing curveballs. One morning, as Ryan arrived at work, he was met with shocking news. The company was downsizing. Due to financial struggles, several positions were being cut, including the supervisor role. Ryan's heart sank. For a moment, he thought everything he had worked for was about to come crashing down. His job, his hard-won respect, was all about to be taken away. But as he walked into the break room, he saw Mr. Alvarez sitting there, calmly sipping his coffee. Ryan took a deep breath and sat next to him. "You heard?" Ryan asked, voice heavy with uncertainty. Mr. Alvarez nodded slowly. "I did." Ryan's voice cracked. "I've worked so hard for this, and now it's gone." Mr. Alvarez looked at him with a knowing expression. "Ryan, sometimes life takes things from you, but that doesn't mean it's the end. It's just a new beginning. Look at this as an opportunity, not as a loss." Ryan didn't understand at first. He was still reeling from the news, but as the days passed, the realization started to sink in. The job didn't define him. It was the lessons he had learned, the person he had become, that mattered. It wasn't about the position he held. It was about the strength and resilience he had built within himself. And so, when the official announcement came, Ryan didn't feel defeated. He didn't feel like a failure. Instead, he walked out of the office with his head held high, knowing that he was ready for whatever came next. His journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days after the announcement felt surreal to Ryan. He had spent so much time preparing for the role of supervisor, only to see it slip through his fingers as the company made cutbacks. But one thing he had learned in the past year was that he wasn't defined by a title. And though he wasn't sure what the future held, he felt oddly calm. Ryan spent the next few weeks searching for new opportunities, trying to figure out where his next step would be. He was no longer the arrogant, entitled young man he had once been. He was someone who valued hard work and respect above everything else. One day, as he was walking through the city, something unexpected caught his eye, a job listing at a small, locally owned company. It was for a maintenance supervisor position at a community centre. Ryan had never considered working in that kind of environment before, but something about it sparked his interest. He thought back to his conversations with Mr. Alvarez, the man who had taught him the value of finding purpose in whatever you did, no matter how small or humble. Without hesitation, Ryan applied. He didn't expect to hear back, but just a few days later he received a call. "Hello, is this Ryan?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, this is Ryan. We'd like to invite you for an interview. Can you come in tomorrow?" Ryan's heart skipped a beat. This was it. His chance. The interview was nerve-wracking, but Ryan walked in with a sense of quiet confidence. He spoke honestly about his experiences, the lessons he had learned, and his dedication to making things better, no matter the circumstances. A week later, Ryan received an email that would change his life. He had been hired. The community centre offered him a position as their new maintenance supervisor. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay wasn't what he had hoped for, but it was an opportunity to continue what he had started, to build something meaningful from the ground up. As Ryan walked into his new office on the first day, he felt a rush of excitement and gratitude. He wasn't just working a job anymore. He was doing something that mattered. He was making a difference. But the most surprising part came when he saw someone standing near the front desk, a familiar face. It was Aaron, the young man who had struggled so much when he first started at the janitor job. "Aaron," Ryan said, his eyes widening. Aaron smiled nervously. "I didn't expect to see you here," Ryan grinned. "Well, it looks like we're both in the right place." Aaron had been hired as part of the maintenance team at the community centre, and Ryan was thrilled to see how much he had grown. The young man who had once felt defeated now exuded confidence, and it was clear that he had learned the same lessons Ryan had. Together, they began to transform the community centre. They fixed broken windows, repainted walls, and ensured that every corner of the building was clean and well maintained. And as they worked, they realized something incredible. Their bond had grown stronger than just colleagues. They had become friends, brothers even. Meanwhile, back at the company where Ryan had once worked, things were falling apart. The employees who had once looked up to him were now struggling to adapt to the new management. The sense of camaraderie had faded, and the workplace felt cold and lifeless. Ryan didn't feel bitter about it. Instead, he felt a sense of clarity. The company's loss had been his gain. His path had been leading him here, to the community centre, where he could make a real difference. One day, as Ryan and Aaron were fixing a leaky pipe in the kitchen, Mr. Alvarez stopped by. He was wearing his usual uniform, the one that had seen years of hard work, and he gave Ryan a proud nod. "I heard you got the job," Mr. Alvarez said with a grin. "I knew you had it in you." Ryan smiled, feeling a deep sense of appreciation. "Thanks, Mr. Alvarez. You were right all along. It's not about the job title, it's about what you do with it." Mr. Alvarez chuckled. "That's right, and it looks like you're doing just fine." As the months passed, Ryan grew more and more content in his new role. He didn't need a fancy title or a high-paying job to feel fulfilled. He had learned that the key to happiness wasn't external validation, but internal peace. And then, one day, as he was locking up the community centre, he got a call from an unexpected source, the company he had worked for before. "Ryan," the manager said, "we've had some changes here, and we were hoping you'd come back as a supervisor. There's a spot for you if you're interested." Ryan thought for a moment. This was the moment, the one where he would have to decide whether to go back to the comfort of the familiar or to continue building something meaningful in his new life. He took a deep breath and spoke his truth. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm happy where I am." I've found a place where I'm doing work that really matters." The manager was silent for a moment. "I understand. Well, good luck to you, Ryan. You made the right choice." Ryan hung up the phone, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in a long time. His journey wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. But as he walked out of the community centre that night, with the lights dimming behind him, he realised that he had found something priceless. He had found his purpose, and that was enough. Months rolled by, and Ryan's life continued to evolve in ways he had never imagined. The community centre became more than just a place of work. It became a home for him. He had started with a basic role, but now, as he and Aaron built a stronger foundation for the place, Ryan found himself stepping into new challenges that pushed him even further out of his comfort zone. But something was different this time. He didn't feel overwhelmed by the pressure. He embraced it. It was a chilly Thursday morning when Ryan's phone buzzed with an unexpected text message. "Ryan, are you free for lunch today? It's been a while. Let's catch up." It was from Mr. Alvarez. Without a second thought, Ryan agreed. Over the past months, Mr. Alvarez had remained a guiding presence in his life, someone who had shared wisdom in subtle ways and always encouraged Ryan to trust in his own path. At noon, Ryan met Mr. Alvarez at a small cafe just down the street from the community centre. The place was cosy, with low ceilings and the smell of freshly baked bread wafting in the air. Ryan ordered a coffee and sat across from Mr. Alvarez, who was looking as calm and composed as ever. "So, how's everything going?" Mr. Alvarez asked, leaning back in his chair. "It's good," Ryan replied, his eyes lighting up. "Really good, actually. I'm learning a lot. Every day's a new challenge, but it feels like it matters. We're making progress, and I can see the difference we're making for the community. I'm not just cleaning or fixing things anymore. I'm part of something bigger." Mr. Alvarez smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I knew you'd get there eventually." Ryan's heart warmed at the compliment. "I've learned so much from you. Honestly, I don't think I'd be where I am today without the lessons you shared." "You're a quick learner," Mr. Alvarez said with a grin, "but I think the biggest lesson you've learned is that everything has value. It doesn't matter if it's sweeping floors or running a company, it's about how you do it. You've changed, Ryan. You don't look at work the same way you did when you started." Ryan nodded thoughtfully. "I used to think I was above certain things. I thought I deserved more, that I should have had something better. But now, I see the importance in every little task. I think that's what's been holding me back in life, honestly. Always chasing the bigger picture without appreciating the present." "Exactly," Mr. Alvarez said. "You'll always keep chasing the next thing, the next promotion, the next opportunity, but if you don't stop to appreciate the journey, you'll miss the real magic." Ryan smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace. "You're right. And now, I'm not just trying to survive anymore. I'm building something, and it feels good." They spent the next hour talking, reflecting on old memories and discussing the future. Mr. Alvarez shared stories from his own life of hard work, personal growth, and challenges that had tested his resilience. By the time they finished lunch, Ryan felt more inspired than ever. As he stood to leave, Mr. Alvarez stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "One more thing, Ryan. There's always going to be someone who doubts you, someone who tries to put you down to make you feel like you're not good enough. Don't let it shake you. The only person you need to prove anything to is yourself." Ryan nodded, the weight of his words sinking deep into his heart. As he walked back to the community centre, something clicked. The doubt he had carried around for so long, the fear that maybe he wasn't worthy of his success, that it had all been some kind of fluke, began to fade away. He realised that his journey had never been about proving something to anyone else. It had always been about proving it to himself. And with each step he took, Ryan felt more confident than ever that he was on the right path. A few weeks later, Ryan received another surprise, one that sent shockwaves through his life. The company where he had once worked, the one that had let him go, reached out to him again. This time, it wasn't about an offer to return. It was something far more intriguing. "We're interested in working with you, Ryan," the email read. "We've seen how much you've grown since you left. We want you to help us change the culture of this place. You're the kind of leader we need." Ryan's hands shook as he read the words. He had been offered a partnership. The very company that had once pushed him aside now wanted him back, not as an employee, but as someone with the vision to lead them into a new era. But as he sat there staring at the email, Ryan realized something profound. He didn't need them anymore. His path had led him somewhere far more meaningful. Ryan didn't respond to the offer immediately. Instead, he spent a few days reflecting on his choices. He asked himself what he really wanted, what would truly make him happy. And after deep thought, Ryan made a decision that surprised even him. He turned down the offer. "I've found my purpose," Ryan wrote in his reply. "I'm happy with where I am. I'm building something here, something that's bigger than all of us. Thank you for the offer, but my journey is taking me in a different direction." The decision felt right. Ryan knew that it wasn't about going back to something familiar. It wasn't about proving anything to anyone. He had learned the most important lesson of all. He had to follow his own path, no matter where it led him. And so, he continued his work at the community centre, expanding his role, building connections with the people in the neighbourhood, and making a lasting impact. He had grown from a young man who mocked others and looked down on those less fortunate into someone who truly understood the value of every individual, every job, and every moment. And as Ryan stood there, looking out over the community centre's parking lot one evening, he realized that the man he had become was exactly who he was meant to be. He didn't need to look for validation from anyone else anymore. He had found the validation he needed from within. His journey wasn't just about success. It was about significance, and that, he knew, was the greatest achievement of all.